on this weekend episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. It is the playoff show. We hear from Foley Fatukasi, and we take a deeper look into how CJ Stroud can get over the hump.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. I'm credential media member and Texans football analyst John Hickman, alongside the man with the big hat, the even bigger smile, and the big H on his chest right now, repping the city of Houston as we get ready for this playoff game. Brian, Playoff B, Big Sarge, Bearfield. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day, kicking off your football weekend with us. We really appreciate it. And for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we'll be taking a deeper look into the mirror of two teams that really favor each other. And how can the Houston Texans come out of this game with the edge? That includes CJ Stroud getting over his slump that we've saw from him over the last 6 or 7 weeks. Taking a deeper look into the numbers and what can CJ do to impact this game. On a positive note, we open up today's show with a quick interview from Foley Fatukasi, a one-on-one thanks to Big Sarge. And how can this D-line continue to create the disruption to put this team in favorable positions? Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Big Sarge,
what's going on?
Thank you. The people need to hear from the players.
Hey man, that's what I'm here for. I'm only here to do what I can do when I can do it.
We talk a lot, right? and it's important for the fans and lovers of this team to just kind of hear the players' perspective. So without further ado, let's hear from Foley Fatukasi.
How excited are you just to get back playing on the field, and also, during this time to be able to help this team in this playoff run?
Really excited. Obviously, these opportunities, they don't come so often. So when you get these opportunities, this is my second. This would be my second playoff appearance, and I'm just honored just to be a part of the group and contribute. So I'm really excited.
Yeah. What have you seen from these young players here getting as they head into this playoff game as well?
Yo, these guys are just the team in general, especially the younger guys. They're just honed in. They're honed in, and you can tell they're becoming masters of their crafts. They're asking the right questions. They're doing the right things. So it's actually really amazing to see, and they're balling out.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm saying. So for some it's delayed gratification. For others, they're seeing it right now. So it's really cool to see.
Last question I have for you. You've played against Justin Herbert before. What are you seeing from him, not only playing against him, but on tape as well?
Oh, man, Justin Herbert, man, he's a great quarterback. I think he operates the offense really well. I think his resume speaks for itself. So, our job is just to go in there and just to execute our assignments. So, keep it that simple.
All right, appreciate it.
Appreciate it, bro.
See, I told you.
Yeah.
John, I have to look real quick. Let me tell you about that last part, because we haven't gotten a chance to really speak to Foley because he's been dealing with, I think, a foot injury, if I'm not mistaken. But he's been on injury reserve. I mean, not on injury reserve, but he hasn't been playing, and so he hasn't really been talking to the media. A lot of those players in the locker room, like Danico Autry as well, and my God, John, why am I drawing the blank? Who got the thick six? Who got 2 thick sixes this year?
Derek Barnett.
They don't really like talking to the to the media if they haven't done anything, and as far as like playing in the game or something like that. And so at the end of that, you hear me say, "I told you," because he was apprehensive, thinking that he didn't want to put any bulletin board material out there for the Los Angeles Chargers. And I told him, "Now you ain't got to worry about that with Big Sarge. I ain't trying to get you. I'm not trying to get you caught up with no hot takes." So that was what to give some context to the end of that.
That D-line unit has had some hot takes get clipped up this year and used. So I know they're probably just more so focused on taking care of business. But for the Houston Texans to get Foley back, I mean, Sarge, what does that mean?
Man, that is huge, man, to be able to put a run stopper like him in the middle, a guy who is very smart at his position, a guy who knows the ins and outs of his position, and knowing that he has, we talk a lot about Will Anderson Jr. and we talk a lot about Danielle Hunter, but just knowing that as long as he helps solidify that inside by playing next to Tim Settle Jr., playing next to Danico Autry, and playing with Tommy. You see those players, they are a close-knit group, and all they want to do is to be able to do their job. And so with Foley being in the game, knowing what he brings to the game, knowing that he is a run stopper, because in this time of the year, in the playoffs, a lot of teams, they want to control the clock and they want to be able to run the ball. And so if he can help, stop that running game and that running attack of the Los Angeles Chargers, he'll be one of those guys who will help contribute to the back end, also being able to do their job. So getting Foley back is not only big as far as stopping the run game, but just his veteran presence on the field.
Yeah, and on Friday's show, we talked about how important it is to get Christian Harris and Azeez back on that field, right?
Yep.
And one of the points that I made was, okay, look, I'm looking at the Houston Texans being able to attack the inside of that offensive line to create the disruption, right? I have all the faith in the world that whether it's Danielle Hunter, who should have been a Pro Bowler, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's Will Anderson, whether it's Derek Barnett, who has played very well for the Houston Texans in his snaps. Danico Autry is one of those inside-outside guys, but whether it's any of those guys on the outside, they'll do a good job in either containing Justin Herbert or bringing them down, as we talked about a couple of times this week, and how much he'll walk into some of those sacks or create his own sack, rather. Why I like Foley back is because, those two linebackers, you can pick and choose who's going to drop in, who's going to drop out in coverage, who's going to attack and blitz or however. But what Foley does is he can command a double team because of how big he is. And he's not a big guy that goes searching for the sacks, right? And a lot of times you get some of those guys that go sack hunting, they get out of place.
Mm-hmm.
The gap discipline just kind of goes down and down and down. And now you look at teams recognizing it and say, we can counter that, right? With Foley, he plays, for the most part, sound defense, sound gap defense, and he'll open up additional holes for linebackers to run through to create pressure up the middle. So that's why I like Foley back, right? And I think Houston getting all of their defensive guys, at least up front, back at one time, and adding that with the fact that they get Christian Harris and Azeez back, to me, that just screams D'Amico, Matt Burke, Rod Wright, everybody involved, find the ways to dial up that pressure to make things a whole hell of a lot difficult for Justin Herbert.
And John, so you brought up a very good point, a very excellent point. Foley's also one of those. He's not like a big guy who is a space eater, but he is a player who can eat up space, if that makes any sense. And, being able to just, what a lot of people don't realize is when you have those, a lot of times when you look at these very good linebackers, what they have up front is guys who eats up the space and creates the different types of holes for them to be able to see what's going on in the backfield, can see if they're running the ball or whatever they're doing, or creates a lane for them to blitz. And when you have players like Christian Harris and Azeez on the field, with Foley being able to eat up that type of space. Now, the good part about it, John, is not only does Foley eat up a lot of space with what he does and how he plays, when he's in the game with Tim Settle is so violent at the snap of the ball that he creates chaos. And so you can get those two guys working in unison, doing what they're supposed to do, doing what we know that they can do. That should open up some type of clarity for the back end to be able to see everything going on up to it, including, rookie safety Kalen Bullock, who is also looking at everything. You get those two defensive tackles doing what they're supposed to do, eating up that type of space. I'm telling you, man, everything becomes more clear now.
Absolutely. And I don't know how many snaps we'll see Foley play. And I would rather know D'Amico. I'm not telling you about your game plan. He mentioned it earlier,
for sure.
week, but if we can see more of those matchups when he is on the field against second-year guard Jamaria Slayer, who's stepping in for Trey Pipkins, I believe that's his name. I hope I'm saying it right. who's out due to injury, you're looking at a more favorable matchup because now Foley, savvy vet, knows how to win in the NFL. Jamari is pretty good, but he hasn't played for a good part of the season. So it's all about finding the matchup that favors the Houston Texans, and I think that's one of them. And again, to your point, you get those guys up in the middle, creating that space, allowing for the linebackers to have the vision to know what gap to attack. That causes a lot of issues for an offense that struggles at times.
Yeah.
We got to talk about.
Well, one more thing.
Yes, sir.
Did you notice I said Bullock and not Bullock?
I did. That's why I smiled. We got to talk about CJ Stroud getting over the hump, and so we'll do that and more on today's weekend show. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of the final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the game, PrizePicks is the best place for you. It's the best place to turn all of your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions of winnings, it's clear people love this platform. So right now I'm looking at the playoff game for CJ Stroud. You can pick less or more on 13.5 rushing yards, or you can pick less or more on 15.5 fantasy score points. It's that simple, right? You can't pick the same players twice. So if you want to go with CJ Stroud, and then you're looking at old reliable Joe Mixon, do you think he'll get less or more on 19.5 receiving yards? If you do, go ahead and pick that. Sit back and watch the cash roll in. Here's a special offer for our Locked On Texans and Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. That's step 1. Use code Locked On NFL. That's step 2. And the outcome, you'll get $50 instantly after you play. Step 3, your first $5 lineup. That's right. Your first $5 lineup gets you $50 instantly. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, to this weekend edition, playoff edition of the Locked On Texans podcast. Your team every day. It's important to talk about the leader of this offense, a guy that I truly believe will have an opportunity in this league as long as the Houston Texans continue to build around them and be smart about it, be an elite quarterback, and that's CJ Stroud. Hasn't had the greatest of years. Sophomore slump, a lot of us can call it. Whatever the case is, Houston will need the best version of CJ Stroud as they get ready to take on the LA Chargers. And before I go into the eye test and what I feel like it would take for us to come away from this game saying to ourselves, CJ Stroud got over the hump of a pretty underwhelming seasonal heel, I want to give some context and advanced stats on what's been a pretty rough year for the quarterback. And please keep in mind, some of these variables are completely out of CJ Stroud's control. First, I want us to take a look at what's been the biggest issue by far this year for not only CJ Stroud, but the offense altogether, and that's the protection or the lack thereof and how that's impacted the offense. And with some of these advanced stats, I want to include EPA because those expected points added, which is a measure that defines success and the value of each play and how it affects the likelihood the offense will score, that's important considering the Houston Texans have scored 0 points offensively in 6 straight games at one point this year. They've had issues all year being able to keep up with teams on the offensive side of the ball, and that has hindered, again, the success of this team. So I look at the EPA per drop back with no pressure for CJ Stroud, positive 0.2. Not great, around the league average, but that's still a positive compared to the EPA per drop back with pressure, nearly negative 0.4. I also want to include that CJ Stroud has avoided 26 sacks. So you look at that 50 sack number that he's sitting around right now, that could have been nearly 80 sacks on the year. So he's done a fairly good job in that department in terms of avoiding the loss of yards. However, his efficiency drops after avoiding those sacks, and so does his EPA. His EPA after avoiding sacks is around nearly -3. And I'll add to this, based on my eye test, we've seen Stroud have to avoid multiple defenders on multiple plays this year, and sometimes it's just best to get rid of the ball. With that being said, we've also seen CJ Stroud not get rid of the ball, not throw the ball out of bounds, but try to make a play. In those plays, at times, we've seen some positive moments, but this year we've come accustomed to seeing more negative moments. So that's one of those EPA, that's one of those metrics that can kind of go hand in hand. Offensive line not doing what they need to do, avoiding 26 sacks. That's a lot on the year. Trying to make up for the loss of yards, but then the ball not going out to live another down or the ball going into the hands of the defender. That's where you kind of place blame on CJ Stroud. Going up against the LA Chargers, we need a better version of CJ Stroud. And what does elite actually look like for Stroud? It may not be 3 touchdowns, right? It may just be 16 for 20, 17 to 21, 200 yards, but you're getting your offense down to the red zone and you're protecting the ball. You're not giving the ball away to the best defense in the NFL, right? And you're also operating once you get to the red zone in a more impactful and effective way. So again, context matters because the offensive line has been completely substandard all year. They've cleaned it up in the last couple of games, excluding Baltimore. They've been a little bit better with a lot of the makeshift changes they've been having to make. So this is one of those moments where both the offensive line and CJ Stroud need to play well hand in hand. But that brings me to another point of how the offensive line, which has struggled picking up blitzes, whether delayed or not, has played a major part in CJ Stroud's downfall this year, as he has nearly a -0.2 EPA versus the blitz. That puts him in the class of Gardner Minshew, the two Jags quarterbacks to say the least. Not ideal for a quarterback we believe will be elite in the NFL. Now, I do want to be fair to the offensive line and hold CJ Stroud accountable a little bit by saying he can create some of his own sacks in the game at times this year. This is something he's done throughout the year. And this is something that both Sarge and I have talked about throughout the week, heading up into this playoff game, a little bit throughout the year. That's the area of CJ Stroud's game where he has to absolutely be much better. Now, this is probably the most important advanced stats of all of these. 2024 QB EPA versus disruption, which is a stat that refers to plays in which either pressure arrives before a play can fully develop and or there is a perfect coverage. And I think for the Houston Texans, in terms of disruption, how many times, especially through week 1 through week 11, when Kenyon Green was out there and the Houston Texans had all the communication errors and issues between Green and Juice Scruggs, how many times once the ball snapped, we saw pressure on CJ Stroud? Inexcusable, right? And so the EPA undisturbed, nearly plus 0.5 for CJ Stroud compared to -0.5 versus disruption. And I mean, that put CJ Stroud in the class of a Mason Rudolph, an old man, banged up, beat up, coming off an Achilles tear, Kirk Cousins, and Derek Carr. Not good. So some of those advanced stats and metrics, they work hand in hand with the offensive line struggles and what we're seeing out of CJ Stroud. So number one, get a CJ Stroud over the hump. What does that look like? The offensive line has to play well. They have to, right? Jared Patterson playing alongside Titus Howard is much better than Jared Patterson playing alongside anybody else at that left guard position. And we're seeing the ramifications of it, right? Blake Fisher, I think, is going to have his hands full, rookie, going up against either Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack. He's going to have his hands full. But this is where collectively as a unit, they have to do a better job for 4 quarters being able to pick up the man that's in front of him. That's including inside gap rule whenever a blitz is coming. That's including communicating at the line of scrimmage what's going on pre-snap. That's including just giving your quarterback the damn time he needs. You do that, you see a better version of CJ Stroud. Once the pocket is broken down this year, once the disruption is there, and more so later throughout the year, CJ Stroud's mechanics goes out the window this year. Those are some things he can absolutely clean up on, and I believe he will. But everything around him just kind of crumbled because, if I'm being fair and frank, I'm sure he's tired of getting hit so much. And without a Tank Dell and without Stephon Diggs, those are two options right there where you look and say, well, if everything breaks down, the chemistry throughout training camp that he built with Stephon Diggs, immediately when Diggs got to Houston, the chemistry that he's built with Tank Dell, rookie year this year before he goes down, and Nico Collins, the tendencies that they've built, the chemistry that they've built, they understand what each other wants to do, and you give CJ that opportunity to maybe make a throw, because he'll make a tight throw to a receiver that he trusts more so than everything's breaking down, the pressure's building up, and now I may have to hit an Xavier Hutchinson who doesn't have a lot of targets this year, doesn't have a lot of catches this year. I may have to hit a John Mechie, again, coming on late, up and down throughout the year. His career high so far season high, was 74 yards and a touchdown. But now I got to operate with some guys I'm not necessarily comfortable with. Cade Stover out there, right? Dalton Schultz, who has been completely underwhelming himself. So I think for CJ Stroud getting over the hump, the main thing is to make sure he has protection. And then to look at Bobby Sloyd, he has to absolutely be better as a play caller. He did not have the best of years for the Houston Texans in terms of play calling. And this is where the redeem moment needs to come in for Sloyd, right? And I would say that DJ Mianami said this on our show last week. I think it'll be important for every deep in-breaking route, if for every 15-yard dig route, then there's maybe a flat, maybe a drag coming through the middle of the field, something that allows CJ to know exactly where the ball needs to go if the play breaks down. So the first read may actually be the deep 15 breaking in route. If the pressure's there, I don't have time, then maybe Dalton Schultz or Cade Stover or Xavier Hutchinson will be my flat option. Or maybe I have Deontay Johnson or John Mechie on a drag route, on a mesh concept, however you want to look at it. So this is a perfect opportunity for everybody. And I know throughout the week they've had a great practice. Big Sarge told me that they were having great practices throughout the week. I know they've cleaned up some things. This is a perfect opportunity for the Houston Texans to rebound from their own transgressions from a play caller standpoint, from a quarterback standpoint, but mostly from a lineman standpoint, and for them to get it together. Now we got to take a deeper look into the mirror on how both of these teams resemble each other and what will it take for the Houston Texans to pull out a victory. Hey, Texan fans, this is the perfect opportunity to let you guys know about Game Time. If you haven't had a chance to buy your Texans ticket, by the time you hear this, it's not too late. Go to Game Time right now. They got exactly what you need. And now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets on your favorite events like the Houston Texans playoff game, maybe the Houston Rockets. Maybe you want to go laugh and go to a comedy event. Maybe you want to get outside, go on a date, and go to a theater play an event. It doesn't matter. Game Time has exactly what you need, and they made it easier with Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, I want to take a deeper look into the mirror of the Houston Texans and this LA Charger team. By the way, man, I just want to give a shout out to a couple of players. Tim Settle Jr. has been amazing for the Houston Texans. Great against the run, great against the pass. Joe Mixon, who has not had a lot of perfect running lanes, but has a lot of explosive plays on the ground this year. All things considered, you talk about getting CJ Stroud over the hump. Well, can't leave out the fact that they're going to need Joe Mixon a lot in this game to make some of these downs a lot more favorable, right? I've preached and screamed all year, and it hasn't reached NRG Stadium, of course, but just get tired of seeing the Houston Texans in long converting downs, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, right? Because the early downs haven't been great, and we can attribute that to the play calling. We also, again, as I put it in that second segment, we can attribute that to the offensive line not giving the offense what it needs to be successful for the most part of the year. So this is one of those moments where we got to take a look at who the Houston Texans are playing. They are playing a extremely stout defense. And we talked about this a couple of days ago. Okay, yeah, the Chargers have faced the likes of a Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, the early year version of Bryce Young, Bo Nix, rookie, Spencer Rattler, Jameis Winston, Drake May. So a couple of rookies on this list. Kirk Cousins, an old washed-up guy. Will Levis, we all know about Will Levis, right? And if we take a deeper look into their numbers per over the cap, and this is a Chargers team that spent a lot of money on defense this offseason. First in points allowed. Opponent first half points in games, second was 7.9. Opponent second half points in games this year, 10th at 9.8. And if you look at the Houston Texans, that's an area of the game where traditionally this year they've scored the bulk of their points in the first half. Second half, that's where they failed. And so I'm curious to see how they'll have a balanced attack to be able to put up points on the board against the Chargers. Total yards allowed this year, 11th in the NFL. Rushing yards allowed this year, 27th in the NFL, 4.7. Now, this is where we could really see Joe Mixon have a good day for the Houston Texans, which is why I wanted to emphasize, hey, if CJ Stroud can get you down to the 10-yard line, I'm comfortable if Houston decides to give the ball to Joe Mixon, because he's made plays for the Houston Texans with and without good offensive line play up front. 5th in EPA per play, 9th in DVOA this year, 5th defensive team on third down in the NFL this year, 1st red zone defense this year. That can get scary for the Houston Texans. They've struggled to score touchdowns in the red zone this year, and they've been kind of scary this year. Leaned a lot on Kaimi Fairbairn. So when I look at this team, I look at the when I take a deeper look into what the Houston Texans absolutely need to do to be successful to pull out a win against, again, a very good Chargers defense. Well, I already told you, I believe in CJ Stroud. And this is one of those moments where great quarterbacks, let's say good quarterbacks, have good games. And so you already know on the opposite side of the ball, like Justin Herbert is going to be ready for this game. When you look at Herbert versus the Houston Texans defense, as somebody that covers the Houston Texans, as Texan fans out there have seen time and time again, I think it's fair for the Houston Texan fans to feel like they can win that battle. Right? Like we've seen the Houston Texans shut down great quarterbacks this year. Aside from, the Lamar Jackson, who may win MVP, And that was a game, on a short turnaround. Was it 4 days later? The Houston Texans had to take them on Christmas after losing Tank Dell. Didn't have an offense out there, and they were out on the field entirely too long. I think that was a depleted version of that defense, but for the most part, they've done a very good job of holding teams in check this year from a quarterback standpoint. The question mark comes in, will our quarterback respond? And this is one of those moments where he has to. He absolutely has to respond. And I look at Justin Herbert, his EPA versus disruption, he's pretty good. He's up there with Jared Goff, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. So once Houston gets to him, they got to get to him. They got to get to him. Having Christian Harris and Azeez back on the field at the same time, I think is amazing. I gave a lot of praise to Tim Settle throughout the year, just opened up with giving some highlights. Shout out to Tim Settle. He's going to be important. But Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, they're going to be going up against Larry Tunsil and rookie Blake Fisher. That's going to be an intriguing matchup. Will Anderson and I think of Daniil Hunter, who I believe will absolutely play with his head on fire and pissed off for being snubbed from not only the Pro Bowl, but the All-Pro team. I thought at the very least he should have been a second-team All-Pro. Those two are going to matter so much for this game. You look at what they can cause on the outside, and what you really like is you like the edge discipline from Will Anderson. You really do. And so they're going to matter a lot in this game. But they don't win this game without Bobby Sloyd being the best version of himself. What does that actually look like? I don't know if we can pinpoint it for 4 quarters. It's not about a drive. It's not about a quarter. It's not about a half. It's about 4 quarters. They are only allowing nearly 17 points per game this year. They've only allowed 300 points this year. And as Daniel Wade put it on the crossover, when they go up against bad offenses, they look worse. Up and down this year, the Houston Texans have looked like a bad offense. And it's always been half-by-half basis, right? First half, man, the Houston Texans look like they can score 30 today. Second half, I don't know how we made it out with a win. And as of late, I don't know how we made it out and didn't get blew out because we were not able to continue to score points, resulting in losses. It's very important for them to come away, to go into this game rather with the best version of Bobby Sloyd and the best version of that offensive line. If they could do that, and that means for Bobby, just get rid of the toss pitch play. And I saw Steve Sarkisian do that last night on the 1-yard line, and I almost lost it. All right, that's a perfect example of let's not get too cute. Let's run north and south. East and west right now against this defense may not work. And let's get to the point of success. And for the Houston Texans, that's going to be the end zone. Let's not play for the 3. If I want to call a screen, let's get Dameon Pierce involved on some of those screens. He is extremely nasty once he gets to the second level. All right? Let me be smart with my play calling. But overall, give CJ the options over the top and underneath from offensive line, give him the time that he needs. And for CJ Stroud, execute. Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, Houston, go get the dub.